All right. So the disaster happened. People scattered. Death toll is up. As a country, we always got to say to ourselves, who to blame?
For many, the narrative around Hurricane Katrina was that New Orleans and Louisiana as a whole were unprepared for this disaster. And there was a lot of finger pointing. Some people blame Mayor Ray Nagin for not evacuating the city earlier, for the lack of a clear plan, or for not anticipating the obstacles that existed for low income people who wanted to evacuate but couldn't. Mayor Nagin pointed his finger at the federal government for designing the levees so poorly. He also said that the government was very slow to respond and was incompetent in helping New Orleans residents. For others, it reflected how the wars in the Middle East were taking up too much time, energy, and focus, and distracted the federal government from solving important problems right here in the United States. Almost immediately after the storm ended, it started to become very clear that the federal government, including the Federal Emergency Management Agency, or FEMA for short, along with President George W. Bush, did not understand how bad things were in New Orleans and across the rest of the Gulf Coast. FEMA was criticized by many for being slow to respond and uncoordinated in their efforts. Many attributed this lack of urgency to the fact that the victims of the storm were largely poor and black. New Orleans was a majority black city, and nearly 30% of the city lived in poverty. Many African American political leaders stated that when hurricanes have hit predominantly white cities, like Palm Beach, Florida, the federal government moves extremely quickly in its response. Whereas in New Orleans, even a year and a half after the hurricane, much of the city had not been rebuilt, and many neighborhoods, like the predominantly black Ninth Ward, were still in ruins for years. Even when help finding shelter did come, it came in the form of unstable government trailers that were often filled with toxic levels of formaldehyde.
Did they say formaldehyde?
Yep. They we're gonna give you shelter, Tracy. We're gonna give you the bottomless of the bottomless barrel.
And also cancer? What the?
And Brad Pitt will come build your house himself.
So, as always, the finger pointing the deal like this, and I'm finna pull a Diaz right now when I say this. Okay, now what?
Hey, they were doing a lot of finger pointing. I'm like, isn't it
Now,
all
now,
y'all's
now what?
faults?
Okay, great. That it was his fault. Now what? Now you gonna
Okay,
build the houses back? Okay, yeah, yeah. It was their fault. Now what? You gonna bring all the people back? Now what? You're gonna make sure that the levees are completely taken care of, so this won't happen again. So, yeah, I get what somebody has to take the blame, but and what now?
Well, yeah, but the blame, such as it is, like I think there's different levels of looking at the blame. Are we looking at who is to blame for the damage and the suffering being as severe as it was, or who is to blame for the response, or who is to blame for the planning that precedes it all? There's different places to look at,
They
but
look. They looked at
unfortunately,
all of them,
huh?
and they looked at all of them. And the funny thing
Yeah,
about what
but
you're saying is when you look at the levels, you notice that the name changed.
right, because I mean, there's Ray Nagin. You can blame him, such as it is, because it's his role for the evacuation and for how the police and the local officials treated people, the survivors. You can blame him for that. Um, I don't think it's all warranted, but you can because he was the mayor. right? And then you got to look at whoever the governor was and blame them. Fair. Then you got to look at FEMA. But once you look at FEMA, you got to ask yourself, what about Congress? They're the ones who actually decides how much funding they have. Who is the head of FEMA? What was their planning like? Right? And then you got to go another step, but you got to look back at just the nature of your community that doesn't prioritize the lives of these people. So it's like there's plenty of blame to go around, and everybody who is owed some blame should get it. But unfortunately, that's not how we as a collective do. We will point out each of those and then blame the president because it's easiest. We say the buck stops with you. You're the president. You're the highest office in the land. Completely ignoring, is that even like his level of responsibility or authority? Or are we just doing it because it feels better to be able to blame the president?
Yeah, because we know who the president is.
Mm-hmm.
How many times you had to look up to find out who the mayor was, or the government, or who's in charge of FEMA? And trust me, yeah, it may not take long to find out who the mayor is and the governor. It takes a little bit more research to find out. Well, wait a minute, FEMA wasn't there when it's supposed to. Who's in charge of that? Now, what's his qualifications? What did he respond to? No, it don't matter. We're just gonna just go after the president because we know